Well, the big story in Washington is a test case for what President-elect Trump can do. Republicans say the Senate confirmation of his AG pick is in jeopardy. And here's what was happening outside the House Ethics Committee late today. Republicans struggling to face and release the facts that they gathered about one of their own, Attorney General nominee Matt Gaetz. Republicans basically now trying to see if they can get away with hiding their report regarding allegations against him. He's up for the most powerful law enforcement post in the country. You can see the press and the interest and the intrigue here today. The meeting was in secret. The Republican chair then told reporters some of the details, and that apparently breaches the protocol where the process is supposed to be fully confidential until and unless these written materials about Gaetz are themselves released.
Are you at least going to release it to the Senate?
There has been no agreement to release the report.
But it has come to my attention that the chairman has since betrayed the process by disclosing our deliberations within moments after walking out of the committee.
When she says that the chairman guest betrayed the committee, I think she's talking about the fact that he spoke about what the deliberations were in the room, or even gave, in the instance of one reporter who caught up with him in the hallways.
Vote against the release?
I did.
Okay, can you explain why?
Because the committee no longer has jurisdiction over the issue.
So they're trying to hide it. In fact, the committee has jurisdiction over its own work. It may send these findings to the Senate, could do that confidentially for the vetting, could release them. That's not really in doubt. The issue is whether Republicans think these findings are so bad for Gaetz and Trump or for their own process that they'd actually rather take heat over being secretive than take heat over whatever's in there. Now, J.D. Vance, the vice president-elect, deployed his links with Senate colleagues to try to help sell Gaetz today. But Republican senators may demand a lot more information before they consider anything. The AG leads the most important law enforcement actions in the whole country: national security, counterterror, prosecuting public officials and public corruption when it's found, sex crimes, and much more. And the United States Senate has always treated vetting for this post as a top priority, and getting facts about a nominee and their ethics is just bare minimum due diligence for a post that affects not only Washington government, but the safety of the United States. On the Democratic side, those senators are saying the FBI should provide all documents relating to that federal probe of Gaetz that previously occurred. It ended with no charges, and Gaetz denied all wrongdoing. If you can see from the frenzied scenes I just showed you in Washington, just a sampling, and the way this story is kicking around, this isn't going away, even if Donald Trump is the lawful president-elect, and even if he generally pushes the Republicans to do what he wants. In fact, at least 5 Republican senators lean against Gaetz. They may not want to begin the new era crossing Trump on a high-profile matter, but the objections are reportedly well even beyond the ethics issues I just told you about. That's how the conservative National Review puts it. Gaetz has clashed with most of the elected members of his party. Many Republicans say his approach, from their own experience and evidence, from what they've learned about him, is not really about ideas or principles, they say. They argue that he has been basically doing self-aggrandizing and partisan positioning for years, and that is a concern if you take that approach to things as serious as national security probes at the DOJ. And Republicans, remember, they began the Congress with that narrow majority. It was Gaetz who used it to squeeze then-Leader McCarthy. He embarrassed him in that early rise to Speaker with those many rounds of votes. He sided with Democrats later to oust McCarthy. And at times it did look like a personal beef. In fact, that's something that Congressman Gaetz denied when he joined us, and we discussed it around those clashes. You seem to have beef with him and him with you. It did seem at times to get quite tense. Let me ask you about the funding.
Well, that's not true, though. I want to push back on that because I can cite specific things that Kevin McCarthy agreed to do. It was really accountability for policy and procedure failures more than it was any beef.
That's how then Congressman Gaetz explained it at the time, and he listed some of the reforms that he did say he wanted from Republican leaders. And I will make this point, which is relevant here. When you have political upstarts that attack the older establishment, that's a story as old as time in either party. Around the country, if you tell people that somebody, forget Mr. Gaetz for a moment, just somebody has come into politics and they're taking on the old guard of either party, that dynamic can be quite popular, certainly not automatically extreme. The difference, according to many Republicans, as I'm reporting for you, is that Matt Gaetz went so hard at so many of his leaders that he may have just burned down more than he could build or replace. And there is a raw math of White House politics here. And it hasn't changed just because we had a very big election. Even a president-elect may not be able to just deliver a win here for a nominee who has completely torched goodwill with, in the math, the very Senate Republicans that he has to count up and get in order to be confirmed into this job.
We have Murkowski and Collins rejecting the duties that they have as senators. And if they do that, their voters should reject them. Our leadership, frankly, is in shambles. You've got McConnell wavering.
Speaking of fools, Republican Senator and neoconservative Markwayne Mullin, Mitch McConnell's real legacy is that he was missing in action when we needed him most, and spent a lot of his time in the Senate putting special interests above American interests. My advice going forward is that the Republican leadership doesn't need to pick one of the Johns. John Thune, John Cornyn, John Barrasso. I think that there are going to be better options than the Johns. Senator Tillis trying to get another blank check for a corrupt country. It's disappointing. There's a certain hubris to all of it.
Attacks on most of the Republicans, attacks on Republican senators by name, and those are just some of the attacks on the senators deciding this nominee's fate. Doesn't even get into the House stuff I told you about. And if you put aside even, say, the votes of Democratic senators who have a say on this, or the nonpartisan concerns of legal vets from DOJ and FBI who have spoken out already about this kind of nominee who they say is unqualified, Gaetz is, simply put, one of the most unpopular figures among Republican senators that Trump could select. And that is not an opinion, and it's not a criticism. It is a statement of where those people stand. I discussed it with Mr. Gaetz myself, and he said it was a point of pride. But why would Donald Trump want that? Why would you go and say, here, let me take someone for this big job who is so publicly opposed to and clashing with all these Republicans? That's actually the whole point. It's on purpose. And let me explain that right now, because it might be the most significant thing about all this. President-elect Trump views Matt Gaetz's partisan approach and this clash with D.C. Republicans as an asset. In his view, as a positive, because Trump publicly says he wants an attorney general personally loyal to him, one who has proven he will ignore, flout, or even deride everyone else in Washington, Republican or Democrat, experienced Republican leaders, people in his own party, veterans of the federal service. That's the kind of person who will clearly go farther and not back down if he does get confirmed. A person who would not fold if the Republican Judiciary Committee leaders, who you see on your screen, some of them, if they push back or use their knowledge of how this all works from decades in to exert their own power, which is, of course, what's supposed to happen. The government has branches that check each other for a reason. They can even issue subpoenas to oversee the DOJ. But Trump has selected someone who is clearly proven, as I just showed you, willing to go against all those people in the harshest possible terms. Trump got here after seeing how it's supposed to work to some degree, those checks and balances. His first attorney general recused from a Trump probe. That's what the rules require. That AG's replacement backed independence at the DOJ. And the final AG, the one you might remember most recently, Bill Barr under Trump, he helped Donald Trump a lot. But he also very clearly stopped at the line of attempted coups and anything leading up to that Jan 6 insurrection. Some have asked why Donald Trump, fresh off this comeback, I've told you, he clearly had a comeback and won. Why would Trump, fresh off that, shorten the traditional political honeymoon with this pick clearly antagonizing his party and the GOP leaders he needs to govern on a host of issues for an unqualified, controversial nominee that forces these reports on ethics, on grifting, on alleged sexual misconduct back into the headlines for as long as this nomination is alive, which would be well through the January inauguration and onto the hearings? How would such a PR-savvy poll like Trump make this the big story after the win and the comeback? Well, one answer is pretty clear. It's that Trump means what he said about retribution, about abusing power, about changing the way the DOJ and prosecutions operate in this country. And that Trump learned last time the epicenter for everything in the federal government is the Justice Department. It is the one part of the government that still tells everyone else where the line is, can even tell the president and his team what they cannot do, and can prosecute even a president's aides if they are found to have broken the law. And while that's happened occasionally throughout our history, it happened more in the first term than for any president since Nixon, as I would remind you see on your screen here. These people learned all of that. And when it comes to crime and punishment, they are supposed to learn their lessons. But some of them may have learned the wrong lesson. And that may be why President-elect Trump is willing to risk so much right now to still install this person who's at public war with most of the Republican Party leadership at the aforementioned Justice Department. Matt Gaetz did win his bid to burn down House leadership, but did he build something sturdy enough to protect him now in the breach?